Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, February 10th, 2020, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And before we dive into the show, I want to thank those of you who have made Talk Nerdy possible this week. The top patrons on Patreon, and remember, you can always pledge your support by going to patreon.com/talknerdy. The top Patreons this week include Mary Neva and her son, I think Jim, Pasquale Gelati, Sinai, Ulrika Hagman, Dudas Infinitas, The Zombie Drummer, Phil T-Bear, Brian Holden, Daniel Lang, and David J. E. Smith. Thank you all so much. It's because of you that this show keeps on going, especially on weeks where I don't sell any ads like this week. So we're just going to go straight on through with the episode. Okay, guys, this one's pretty fascinating. So I sat down with two individuals this week. Paul Kwaitkowski, who is the Wildlife Conservation and Sustainability Manager at Mount Auburn Cemetery, along with Dr. Maria Aliberti-Lubertazzi, who is an adjunct faculty member at Rhode Island School of Design and also an environmental scientist specializing in wetland and urban ecology. She is actually collaborating with Mount Auburn Cemetery on biodiversity research and education. So between Paul and Maria, we chat about the really cool urban ecology citizen science projects that are happening at a cemetery at Mount Auburn. So yeah, guys, you're going to be so fascinated because I know I was. Without any further ado, here they are, Paul Kwaitkowski and Dr. Maria Aliberti-Lubertazzi. Well, Paul and Maria, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's good to be with you, Cara.
Thank you.
All right. So I love it when I get to do an interview that's a three-person interview. It's not common, and that's mostly because of the constraints of my setup. My show has always been a one-on-one show, which means that I'd have two microphones and I only have, the potential to record with one other person. But we've managed to hack it and make it work. So it's going to be really fun to get the insights from both of you as we chat today. All right, so let's talk urban ecology, wetland ecology, urban wildlife. Specifically, this was so exciting to me when I first heard that we would have the opportunity to chat, specifically in a cemetery. So, Paul, you are the Wildlife Conservation and Sustainability Manager at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Is that a typical title? Do most cemeteries have a wildlife conservation and sustainability focus?
As far as I know, I may be the only wildlife conservation and sustainability manager in the United States at a cemetery.
That's incredible. And so, okay, number one, how does one get that job? And number two, what is it about Mount Auburn that this is a special project or special program that's happening at this specific cemetery?
Well, when I came to Mount Auburn as an intern back in 1999, I had been studying urban ecology in college. And I was interning in the horticulture department here, but my true interest was in urban ecology. So I just over a period of years kind of developed and created my own niche, trying to educate people about the importance of urban ecology and how where the cemetery is much more than just an active cemetery or an arboretum, but we're also one of the largest green spaces in this urban environment. So eventually, there was enough interest in some of the programs and projects that I was initiating that the cemetery was gracious enough to create the position of Wildlife Conservation and Sustainability Manager.
And you guys are located kind of right in the middle of the city in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right?
Well, we're actually on the Watertown-Cambridge line. The majority of the cemetery is in Watertown, but both areas are really built up urban areas.
It's the metropolitan Boston area, but we're close to the Boston, so we're in the inner part of that.
We're across the river, the Charles River from Boston.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when I'm looking on like Google Maps right now at your location, it's obviously a large kind of green patch on the map, but it's surrounded by development.
Yes.
Oh, it's fascinating. Okay. So you have kind of your own ecology that exists within that green space. And of course, Maria, to bring you in here, you are an environmental scientist and you're kind of collaborating with Mount Auburn, kind of working on this wetland ecology, urban ecology project, and also citizen science, right?
Yes, it's multifaceted. So this will be my 5th year doing research here at Mount Auburn. This whole research and citizen scientist thing has been evolving over the last, would you say, 7 or 8 years, or less than that?
Well, our citizen science program began 5 years ago. But before that, we had various biodiversity researchers that had implemented projects here at Mount Auburn, and we wanted to expand and build upon those efforts.
And so one thing that's very important to understand, very special about Mount Auburn Cemetery, is its history. And it's, in addition to being this big, green space, it also has many famous people buried here, and architectural and arboricultural elements to it. So people from all different backgrounds and interests visit this cemetery. But in addition to that, Paul, I wish I knew more about this, but there's a lot of data on birds at this cemetery for 100 years or something?
Yeah, more, yes. Yeah, Mount Auburn has been designated as one of the 79 important birding sites by the Mass Audubon Society. And so every spring, we are swarmed by birders that follow the spring migration. And so that is, one key component of what we're pursuing in our citizen science projects. We have a breeding bird survey, which was implemented last year, and essentially we have an ecologist named Brooks Mathewson, who leads a group of citizen scientists to 16 different points out on the cemetery grounds where they stop at each point, and they essentially conduct point count surveys. So they will record any birds that they see or hear within a 3-minute period at each point. And the main thing they're looking for is to identify birds that not only that they see and hear, but that are demonstrating breeding behavior, such as collecting twigs to make nests, or they may be bringing food back to young or actually feeding young in the nest. This is kind of built upon years of the birders recording their observations, not only here on a birding board we have, but now as technology has advanced, they record their observations to eBird.
That's really cool. So I mean, I guess maybe, I don't know, taking a step back, some people who are listening right now might be like, wait, what? You're doing like ecology and citizen science work at a cemetery? Like, how does this even happen? But of course, a cemetery is a large green space, right? Like this is an area that is often maintained and that is just naturally going to attract whatever the urban wildlife in this region might be. Is that correct? Is that a good way to look at this?
Absolutely. And it might be helpful if I gave you a little more background before Maria really steps deeper into her area of expertise, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Mount Auburn was consecrated in 1831. And we are recognized as America's first garden cemetery. And our founders were well aware of the importance of sustainability. Even back then, they tried to plan the cemetery in a fashion that could sustain wildlife. Mm-hmm. So we're still an active cemetery to this day, but we're also an arboretum.
Oh, cool.
And we've had, as I mentioned earlier, we've had biodiversity researchers conducting various research projects here over the years, but those were mostly related to our amphibian residents here. And so some years ago, I thought that it was probably a good time to reach out to additional researchers so that we could expand on, learning about what was here and also bring the community closer to nature. Because for many folks, our green space is where people go to get outdoors, because many of them, live in apartments or condos, or they live in houses with posted stamp yards, and they don't have really the opportunity to spend a lot of time amongst, a woodland setting or amongst, water bodies, without being crowded out by many other visitors at that same site. So we developed a citizen science program, and we currently have 8 studies that are incorporated in this program. So we started with a phenology study in which we have volunteers that go out and observe 10 species of deciduous trees and shrubs around the grounds for a total of 64 specimens. And in the spring, they record things such as bud burst, leaves unfolding, flowers open. And the reason for this is we're trying to determine the timing of life cycle stages in relationship to weather and climate. Because we need to know, as the birds are migrating north, are these specimens of trees and shrubs, are their leaves and flowers open at the same time as the birds are arriving and as the insects are emerging, so that the birds have a food source? Or as the climate warms, is everything happening earlier, and are the birds able to time their migration to arrive when the food sources are available? So that's a very important long-term study, and it was our initial effort. We have 125 citizen scientists that have been trained for this program. So it's been a great success. Wow. 2020 will be our 5th year of data collection. And in the fall, the same citizen scientists walk the same route on the grounds to observe leaf color change, leaf drop, and fruit and seed drop as well. We also expanded our amphibian monitoring, which began as monitoring our spotted salamander population here, into observing some of our other amphibians and reptiles. And what we found was we really didn't have great diversity in amphibians and reptiles. And part of that may have been to habitat destruction, because we are an active cemetery and we do still bury people here. But also years ago, some very dangerous chemicals were used in the horticulture field. And so we could have lost populations to that. So we determined that it was appropriate to reintroduce native species that at one time most likely were here. So we've reintroduced American toads, gray tree frogs, and spring peepers. And that was led by a wetlands ecologist named Joe Martinez. And now we currently have 3 breeding populations we have breeding populations of all 3 of those species now. So one of the dramatic changes is that where the cemetery was quiet in the spring, now you can come in and you can hear the American toads trilling and the spring peepers peeping, and it really adds that extra bonus and improves the experience of visiting Mount Auburn.
Yeah.
So that's a win-win for us and for the public as well.
Say in addition, just to point out that the spotted salamanders are a kind of a very specialized and somewhat rare species. And the fact that their population stayed here since 1831, it's a species that, so I don't know out your way whether you hear about vernal pools. It's a type of wetland.
Okay.
That fills in the spring with water and then dries out by the end of the summer. And one particular thing is that they're usually in wooded areas, and that there's no fish. There cannot be fish living there. And so a whole suite of species, both vertebrate and invertebrate, specialize in being able to live and reproduce in those habitats. And the fact that those spotted salamanders are still here is pretty amazing.
I love that. That's really cool. It's like something that probably, folks who obviously wouldn't take the time or haven't had the opportunity to come visit or to read about these things may never know that there are these, like you said, these kind of rarish creatures that not only live right next door, but have been thriving next door for over 100 years. Maria, how did you get involved in working with the cemetery on these kind of urban ecology, these wildlife projects? Because you're a collaborator there, correct?
Correct. Yes. It was actually through Joe Martinez, who's at Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology, where I've done research in urban ecology, and I also teach an urban ecology course. And I connected him when I heard about his work at Mount Auburn, both monitoring the spotted salamander population and also doing this reintroduction of these 3 amphibian species. Mm-hmm. And I had him come and speak to my class, and talking with him more, I was like, wow, I'd love to. Oh, there are ponds there. I study ponds. And so it was through Joe that I connected with Paul. And what do I study? Specifically, I do a lot of different things, but my doctoral work for my PhD was looking at dragonfly populations on an urban to rural gradient in Rhode Island.
Okay, so urban to rural gradient. So from more populated areas to less populated areas?
More populated by humans and built up. Yes.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. And did you find that there are massive differences between those 2 areas?
Okay, so I have to explain something first, is that dragonfly adults are beautiful, but that's not what I study. I study the dragonfly's juvenile stage, which some people call larvae, but technically they're called nymphs. Okay. And they live in the water. They live in the water for 1 to 3 or 4 years, depending on the species, before the nymph climbs out of the water. Its exoskeleton cracks open and the adult pulls itself out. Mm-hmm. And then if it's lucky and not eaten by a bird, it flies away. So it leaves behind that exoskeleton. And that's what I study, is I collect exoskeletons of dragonfly nymphs, which are called exuviae. And by collecting those, I can do a survey over the course of the whole season, because certain things come out at different times along the seasonal path, right? So I collect those and I then identify them in the lab. So then what I have is a data set of which species of dragonfly successfully emerged from this body of water. So that's what I used for my doctoral work. And I studied the whole state of Rhode Island, but I really had a lot of urban sites, including urban cemetery sites in Rhode Island. And so when I connected with Joe, and then I was like, wow, I want to know more about this. I had never been even to Mount Auburn. I live not far from here, actually. Embarrassingly, but
so that's really interesting. You were basically, as part of your doctoral research, you did survey some sites where, like cemetery sites, but my assumption is that those cemetery sites didn't have active, ongoing research projects like Mount Auburn does.
Absolutely not. However, one of them currently does have I don't know if he's not really a researcher, but he's really bringing the cemetery, this is in Providence, to light in environmental circles. And so he's just a great voice and with regard to that. But no, that's correct. I usually had to just ask permission. And there was maybe one person that worked there, if that.
It's interesting because it ostensibly, like, it makes perfect sense that a cemetery environment would, especially one with an active arboretum, like, with so much urban ecology, would be a place for environmental stewardship, a place for wildlife management, and of course, a place where you could study some of these populations in great detail, because it's something of a controlled environment. Like, it makes perfect sense to me sitting here across the internet from you, but I wonder if, from just kind of like an emotional gut reaction perspective, the first reaction from a lot of people is like, ooh, a cemetery, or like, science at a cemetery. I don't know.
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because we have this conversation quite often. And typically the people's first response is, you do that there? I had no idea you could do that at a cemetery. We take very seriously our role in the community as educators and as being leaders for sustainability. So we have gone to great lengths to try to preserve our woodland areas and protect our water bodies, but also to create more naturalized areas that at one time were much more ornamental.
Gotcha. So like lawns and like maybe plants that didn't naturally grow there, but were just to look pretty for people.
Exactly. So, but being an active cemetery, there are expectations for what people think a cemetery should be. And so we do work with lot owners and with the public to try to explain the reasons behind some of the changes we're making, and we try to meet people at a certain point so that people's expectations are met while we still are protecting and expanding habitat for wildlife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It does seem like a funny thing where my assumption would be, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not sure if you actually do this kind of interfacing, but I'm sure some people at the institution do. My assumption would be that even like the families who come to visit their loved ones or people who are laid to rest there, that if they're informed and educated about what the projects are, and if they really think about them, it's a win-win, right? It's about providing and maintaining a really beautiful, really natural habitat that for organisms to thrive, and that's actually creates a more uplifting experience for everybody when they go to visit. But initially, I wonder if there's some pushback, or if you have to deal with any sort of like, wait, I don't want people to come visit a cemetery where my loved ones are laid to rest to see birds, or like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with there being all this other science going on. It's really just should be here for my, for grandma.
Well, I would say the more of the pushback we have is towards expanding naturalized areas away from ornamental, because that's more of the expectation of visitors and lot owners of what a traditional cemetery is. So people may agree with what we're doing and say they appreciate it, but often they may say something like, "Yeah, I want there to be habitat here at the cemetery for wildlife, but I don't want it by my lot." But one of the really interesting things we've found is, as more people become aware of our efforts at environmental stewardship, they are embracing it. In fact, one of our salespeople told me last week that she was out looking at lot space with a family, and they saw one of our signs for our breeding bird survey, which are very attractive numbered signs on stakes that we try to tuck into the to the surrounding landscape, so that they don't look out of place, but so that our citizen scientists know exactly where to go. And when this family saw that sign, they were like, "Oh my gosh, I want to be buried near this location where I know people will keep coming in to learn about birds and protect the environment." So I think people's perspectives, are changing, and a lot of people are thinking more long-term than ever before, especially in the face of the warming climate.
Yeah, it seems like, especially in the face of the warming climate and this kind of change, and we'll dive into that too with respect to some of your longitudinal citizen science projects. But also, I think in the face of the fact that we do have an exploding population, and if we want to be able to continue to bury people underground, we're going to have to think about how we're utilizing cemetery space. It takes up a large percentage of the ground. And if, like you said, it's only utilized for ornamental and like really manicured locations, it's actually encroaching, and has been historically for a very long time, encroaching on the habitat of wildlife, in order to build a cemetery. And of course, Mount Auburn has been around for quite a while, but if you need to build a new cemetery, you're probably not going to tear down buildings that once existed. You're probably going to go into a wild area, unfortunately, and level out the ground and plant some grass and then start putting in graves. And it does seem like there's a way to maintain a wild, or maybe I should say a managed wild population, and like kind of have the best of both worlds, and still have a place where loved ones can be buried and people can come to visit them. I'd actually rather visit, as you said, a plot that's surrounded by trees and birds and insects and the sounds of frogs and the sounds of wildlife than just like a grass field that goes on as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, no, I think things are changing. I mean, obviously this was a novel thing that you were told about, Paul. But I think, I think people's perspectives are changing. And as far as land use and decisions on that, it's hard to know. And then in different regions of the country and the world, it's going to be different on how decisions are made about that too, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and obviously, I know that as environmental scientists and organizers of these projects, your role is not a political one about how do we bury bodies in this country, and what do we do? What are the death decisions that we can make that are more natural? But the fact is that is happening anyway. So how can we make the best of the fact that there are these massive cemeteries, and maybe. I mean, I hope that the projects that you guys are doing could be inspirational for other cemeteries to help understand how they can contribute as well. I think about Los Angeles. I live here in very urban center, but an urban center where we're very proud of our urban ecology and urban wildlife efforts. We have beautiful parks in the middle of the city. I think we're the only city in the world other than Mumbai. So there are two cities in the world that have a big cat population in the urban centers, because because we have, pumas that live in the city and that are maintained within our mountain areas. And there are, like, even next to Griffith Park, there are these massive, massive cemeteries. And it's, like the animal populations that I see in some of these cemeteries are peacocks. Like, I don't think those were naturally living there. I think they put them in, or like doves or ducks in the pond, which is great, but it does feel very ornamental to me. And it would be cool to see a little bit of that kind of quote unquote rewilding of some of these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and to make the case, to continue to try to expand or improve on wildlife habitat while still maintaining the general character of the cemetery. Mm-hmm. We decided to take a look at wildlife and habitat in the big picture. So we did aquatic surveys of the wildlife that we had in our ponds and our vernal pool. We did terrestrial surveys, and that gave us some baseline data, which then in turn helped us to develop a citizen science naturalist program. Mm-hmm. And so within this program, volunteers can learn about mammals and insects and amphibians and reptiles and birds. We also offer intro to plant identification and botany, as well as field notes and nature photography, and also a training on the use of the iNaturalist app, and on becoming informal educators to the public. So it's a really well-rounded program, and Maria actually co-leads the insect training every year, which is has been a great success. And the participants in this program, though, they will attend classroom trainings late winter, early spring, and then they can volunteer to become research assistants throughout the summer and fall for projects such as Maria's work.
And so we have also, since I've been researching here, there's also been, as a woman studying ant populations here and butterfly and moth populations, correct?
Yes.
So currently, as far as the invertebrates go, that's what.
Right. Well, we have a faculty member from Lesley University named Amy Myrtle, who is she is leading an arthropod study, which is essentially the caterpillars count program, which was developed out of the University of North Carolina, mm-hmm. and that is essentially the protocol for that is the volunteers will look at the undersides of leaves for arthropods. And also for damage from those arthropods. And this effort coincides with our phenology effort because, of course, many of these arthropods are consumed by the migratory birds as they're moving their way north. Amy also leads a pollinator study in which volunteers will photograph pollinators visiting the perennial gardens on the grounds and documenting through photography what is visiting each individual plant, so she can determine what pollinators are here and when they're arriving, and from that we can then really take a look at our plant collections to see if we're meeting the needs of pollinators by mm-hmm. having enough mm-hmm.
larval
host plants, enough plants that could be food sources nectaring. Or plants, for nectaring. And also, in general, we want to look at our plant collections so that we know that, we have enough breeding ground and cover for any of our wildlife species here.
That makes sense. If you were to add up all of the different projects and programs that are going on from a scientific perspective, kind of underneath that umbrella, not just the citizen science programs, even though it does seem like that's a large percentage of the work that you do, how many individual kind of research projects would you say that you have happening at any given time?
Well, we had 9 different projects in 2019.
Wow. Okay. And were they all citizen science projects or just some of them?
Eight of the nine had a component.
Mm-hmm.
All of the biodiversity researchers that I've, tried to, recruit or have reached out to me to see if they could pursue, their interests here. These efforts were all led by individual researchers.
Okay.
And because I was developing a citizen science program, I reached out to each researcher to see if we could accommodate their research by having research assistants in the form of citizen scientists kind of just jump in and assist with their work and also learn about their work and gain, the experience of being closer to nature.
Sure. And I guess that leads me to a need for a little bit of clarification about how the citizen scientists in each of these different programs, and I'm assuming there's some variability, what is their commitment like? Do you have people who sign up and who are really in it and who are working like most days of the week? Or do you sometimes have people who are coming to the cemetery just to walk the grounds who read about, oh, while I'm here today, I could just count some things? Yeah, I'd love to do that as part of my daily, stroll.
Well, first we create the curriculum, mm-hmm. and then we promote it to the public via our website and other social media platforms, and then through just posters at like local libraries or making local teachers aware of what some of the opportunities here at Mount Auburn are. And the way it generally works, because our citizen scientists are all volunteers, we have different expectations for each biodiversity research project. So, for instance, for the phenology study, we ask that people visit the cemetery once a week, and we broke down our phenology trail into 3 sections so that each section could be done in about 45 minutes. Cool. That way, if people are on their lunch break, they might just walk one section.
Yeah.
Or if they have more time, they could do 2 sections or the entire trail. Some people come more than once a week, and some people can't quite make it every week. Mm-hmm. But that is the ideal for us, is that we have consistent data collection with this effort. And some of the other projects, folks, again, we try to have them come on a regular basis, but each project's a little different, and sometimes things are coordinated on the availability of the biodiversity researcher themselves. Mm-hmm. For instance, we have a faculty member from Lesley University, and he also is works for Boston University. His name is Chris Richardson, and he's undertaken an urban bat study at Mount Auburn. So he will have volunteers join him here quite late at night, which is a much different experience than the citizen scientists who are here, visiting in the mornings for the phenology or the arthropod studies. So it gives those volunteers a really unique experience at Mount Auburn.
Coming back to the work that you're doing, Maria, when you're in specifically with your collaboration at Mount Auburn, we talked a little bit about how you first got involved, but now that you are involved in an ongoing capacity, are you working on a specific project? Are you working with Paul on kind of doing some of the more, like, I don't know what you would call it, architecture of some of the ongoing projects? Like, how has your role evolved?
Okay. So I've been working here now for 4 years.
Okay.
And what I'm doing, like the overall thing that I'm doing is I want to, I'm studying the emerging dragonfly community at the 4 wetlands on the property.
Okay.
I started 4 years ago, just doing I'm just going to go see every couple weeks kind of thing. So a small little, just to take a look. And then, so that was the first year. And then the following 3 years, I've been sampling every week during the whole field season. So ideally late May through late September. And this last year, so I started out sampling 2 of the ponds on the property. Mm-hmm. And this last year, so my 4th year, it was my 4th year sampling those 2 ponds, but then I added the other 2 ponds to look. And so I'm looking at the dragonfly community that is completing its life cycle and emerging from the ponds. I also look at the adults flying around too. But I'm also starting 2 years ago, we did a little pilot project with the citizen science program to see, could we do this? Could this work? And so then the following year, which was last field season, I had 2 volunteers who stuck with it through the whole, coming weekly, doing a similar survey to what I do, but in a different place. Mm-hmm. And I'll explain the one of the factors is that, so the demographics of the volunteers change and vary, just like what Paul was saying, people who want to come at certain times of the day or are available at certain times of the day. But like for surveying, for collecting dragonfly exuviae, you need a degree of physical mobility to access getting into the water.
Gotcha,
usually.
Yeah.
And navigating through the water and the plants in the water and that sort of thing. And so that's something to definitely plays a role in my project. Now, the team that has the citizen scientist team that has done this for me really well last year and even the year before. They are 2 of them, and they do it together, and so the whole complementing each other in multiple ways in collecting the data. And I think that's cool. I think that this is just the citizen science research requires people to volunteer. So they're volunteering their time, but to also commit to some degree. Mm-hmm. And when you have people working as teams, that helps with that committing, I think.
Oh yeah, like the motivation and the accountability mm-hmm. and all that good stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm in the process right now of processing my data that was collected last year. So I can't make a comment yet about the citizen scientist work last year. However, the first year that I did the pilot project with the citizen scientist program, what we found was really interesting is that they collect all kinds of things, not always exactly what I'm looking for, but what they did collect was a species that I had not found in my data collection. And it was, I don't know, it was a species that they didn't collect the actual exuviae, but they collected a molt, a mm-hmm. shed exoskeleton that was floating in the water. And so it was a really kind of it was a different it was a really unique piece of information.
Oh, I love that. How, isn't it fun? I mean, that's sort of the whole point, right? When it comes to these scientific questions that we're asking, and sometimes we can get really in the weeds and really focus on very specific questions, looking for very specific outcomes. And then every so often, there's like a really nice surprise that you come across that kind of changes your perspective a bit.
Yeah. I mean, all kinds of other things that I am not surveying, but yet I'm still interested in things that live in the pond and spiders and other aquatic insects, that what they collected were, I say, valuable pieces of information. They're not data exactly for my research, but doesn't matter. Pretty interesting.
Still important, right? It all kind of comes together to tell this big important picture. I think it's really smart and it's really cool that so many scientists are discovering and realizing that whether it be the data collection side of things, as it often is the case with citizen science in wildlife, or whether it be the data analysis side of things, like is so often with things like Galaxy Zoo and some of the more like astronomy, physics, citizen science opportunities that are out there, regardless, that there's just a lot of information that needs to be made sense of. It needs to be collected, and then we need to make sense of it. And if you can enlist people who really care about it and who want to help, and maybe it makes their experience of visiting a cemetery, for example, that much more fulfilling. What a cool way to collaborate with individuals like living within your own community.
So one of the things that I've heard mentioned a lot is that within the biological sciences anyway, the question of how useful is citizen scientist data?
Mm-hmm.
And this is still, I think we're still early on I'm not saying us at Mount Auburn, but people in general, this whole, how to include more people and how to be able to use what they can collect, to train them well, to teach them. I don't know. I think there are a lot of benefits in addition to what benefit you get from actually producing data.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's probably really fulfilling both for the individuals involved, but also for the scientists who get that data. And I think probably, I mean, my assumption is, and Paul, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this. My assumption is that there are downstream benefits that we can't really even calculate yet because of things like iNaturalist and because of these large databases that maybe somebody who makes an identification as they're hiking on their neighborhood trail says, oh, I think I saw this snake. I'm not sure what it is. Here, let me snap a picture. And now it's got your GPS coordinates and it's time stamped. And, maybe a couple scientists who are on there or a couple of local naturalists who are on there are like, oh, yeah, that's a whatever rattlesnake. Oh, okay, cool. But then later down the line, it may become really relevant that all of those sightings were collected because somebody working on their doctoral dissertation 5 years from now might say, I want to look at all of these different time-stamped collections, and I have a really important research question that I'm trying to answer, and look at this wealth of information that's in front of me.
Absolutely. And one of the beneficial components of all this work being done here is Mount Auburn Cemetery is located right down the street from Harvard University. Mm-hmm. And so at the Museum of Comparative Zoology, we often will donate specimens for their collections there. And that has proven to be very important and very useful to various faculty members over at Harvard, who then, can come over to Mount Auburn and do additional research based on, some of the discoveries that have occurred here. And I think one of the really great benefits for our citizen scientists are, as they attend classroom and field trainings and as they participate in tutorial walks, their knowledge as they participate year in and year out grows, and they become much more familiar and much more competent in the subject matter. And it's really gratifying to see these people not only communicating, with each other to share information or reaching out to researchers who may not even be working, who they may not be working for, to share information based on their observations. But they also, become comfortable to share with visitors who come in and might see them in their citizen science T-shirts or notice they're wearing a lanyard. that says they're a citizen science volunteer. And so they describe not only our program, but they describe the work that is being done. And people are just, amazed to learn about it. But I think just based on, what I notice from observing our citizen scientists is that it's very gratifying to them to be able to share what they've learned. Yeah, we're essentially building a science community here.
And then where are they going to take that? I mean, ideally, hopefully, that they will themselves and also people they communicate with will be interested in looking at, well, what's in the park that's down the street from where I live? Like I know what to look for in some certain wildlife component. Now let me go see if it's down there. Now, in my urban ecology research and in a lot of other researchers as well, a lot of times urban habitats are ignored and assumed to be like nothing.
Yeah, or people like painted or something.
Yes.
Yeah, it's weird.
And so for a long time now, biology and ecology have ignored urban habitat. And what they're finding now, I would say around 2000 was when things really started to get going, and I mean in all over the world, but also all different kinds of wildlife have people are looking more at urban populations, finding stuff that they didn't know was there, and then finding novel situations that have come about because this is a non-natural type of environment, and certain animals and plants are adapting to these weird conditions. And so we have a weird mix that's not the same as in natural, pristine habitat.
Yeah, I was interested to find out, Maria, for example, you mentioned some of the kind of unexpected outcomes of finding this molt of this organism that you didn't expect, or maybe some of the insights about the salamander. What was it? The spotted salamander, and how they've thrived over many of the years. Maybe between you and Paul, especially because there, like you said, upwards of 9 projects going on last year. I'm wondering if there's anything that sticks out to you in your mind of like interesting findings, whether you expected them or not, but things that you're like, oh, this is the fruit of our labor. Like, look at this cool stuff that we've been discovering through the use of citizen scientists, and also just through really being able to take the time to observe in these interesting environments.
Well, I would say that one of the really interesting things that I've seen is that when we were doing the native amphibian reintroductions, we were introducing tadpoles at our vernal pool area, which is in the center of the cemetery. And it's essentially, a heavily wooded glen in the center of the cemetery. And it was interesting to see as the tadpoles metamorphosized and then eventually went up onto land. It was interesting to see where they dispersed to and where future breeding populations occurred. Because what happened was the American toad completely bypassed a pond in between the vernal pool and another pond, and they began breeding in that third pond. And it was interesting because we could see toadlets out on the grounds all over the cemetery, but they for whatever reason they had skipped that second water body. And several years went by, and then finally we started hearing the trilling in the spring from the American toads at that third pond. And so it was, everyone was very excited and made sure to go over to that pond to observe the toadlets once they emerged from that water body. And it was, really something special to see how wildlife, disperses and then its populations grow, rather, because it happens in unanticipated ways.
And anecdotally, there's data that those toads have left the premises and gone elsewhere. It's anecdotal at this time, but that the population has moved to other places where it had been extirpated.
Oh, very cool.
Before. Yeah.
Right. There's an old railway line that runs along the perimeter of Mount Auburn Cemetery, and then it heads over to a reservoir in Cambridge. And that has kind of acted as a wildlife corridor. And so some amphibians, but also mammals as well, have made use of that old abandoned railway line, which is now being turned into a multi-use bike path. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the traveling of some of our wildlife. But it's those amphibians were released here, and they made use of that corridor to bring themselves to new breeding ground.
And I say that hands down, all of this amphibian stuff is very cool. Like that's the top thing I think for what's been going on here. But with regard to my dragonfly data, I'll tell you. They're compared to my research in Rhode Island, looking at urban ponds as well. The ponds that I've been studying here have been pretty low in diversity of dragonflies. However, what is very cool is that the two ponds that I have surveyed now for 4 years on Mount Auburn's property have entirely different species communities emerging from them.
Oh, cool. So they're kind of like distinct little environments.
Yes. One being the vernal pool, and the other being the largest pond on the property that's very sunny and open, has a lot of surrounding area is lawn. And whereas the vernal pool, like Paul says, it's in a glen. So it's got a lot of towering trees and woods around it, and it sits in on a hill. Anyway, so very cool that the fact that there are very different populations. And then this year, so the first 3 years of data that I have been, like I said, very species poor compared to places in Rhode Island, but consistent. Until this year. And then this year, I had a bunch more new species that showed up. So,
cool.
So like I said, I'm processing that right now. But I know for sure that there are at least 4 new species of dragonfly that I had not detected before.
Wow. Well, that's exciting and surprising. I mean, it's so cool that in each of these individual research projects, there are these exciting outcomes and just, it kind of iteratively increase knowledge, but also sometimes these little shifts in knowledge that can occur kind of quickly when you discover something new. And those are specific to the individual projects that you're doing. I'm wondering, as we're getting kind of close to closing up our conversation, if maybe both of you have anything to share about how these projects at Mount Auburn can potentially have a larger impact. Like, what can other researchers, other people who are interested in citizen science, maybe learn from the work that you're doing? How might it be applied in other areas? And, what's sort of the greater impact of this kind of investigation?
Well, I think probably the most important takeaway from any citizen science program going today is that these programs should be designed not just for to help a biodiversity researcher with their research, but also to get people outside, closer to nature, because people more than ever are demanding to know what is happening, what exists around around them
Mhm.
and what is either happening to them or what they fear may happen to wildlife or the flora all around us. As we hear these terrible stories of wildfires and droughts and flooding and sea level rise.
Yeah, colony collapse, and all these things that are happening with globalization, with climate change, with habitat loss, like these terrible outcomes.
Right. So people really want to become part of a solution, and they want to get involved. And I think that, citizen science is a great avenue for people to be able to participate.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just wanted to really briefly mention that Mount Auburn also participates in the annual City Nature Challenge that I believe Los Angeles and San Francisco created some years back. So Mount Auburn is a site every year for a BioBlitz of the City Nature Challenge. So we're proud of that.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I'm always involved in that every year. I have a lot of good friends at the Natural History Museum of LA County who have spearheaded that. And there's like a fierce rivalry with San Francisco here in LA about who can make more observations in that City Nature Challenge. That's really cool to hear that you guys are heavily involved in that as well. I think it's so fun, and it really is so important.
I hope ultimately that the outreach continues to expand, and if that can eventually influence politics and land use decisions, whether locally or regionally or nationally, I hope that's one thing I hope for. And the additional thing that I wanted to add is that I would like to have more homeschoolers involved in this.
Oh,
and so
brilliant.
Hoping to connect a few people I know this year, but that would be something cool to add another real, a different demographic to the citizen scientist program. And that ideally would also influence people in the future as they learn and get older and decide what they want to work on in the future.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of both of those points really in a way are a great segue into the final two questions that I like to pose to my guests on the show, because I do think that they tend to evoke or elicit more of a thoughtful and maybe, dare I say, political response. And so I think that bringing those topics up are really important. So if you guys are ready for it, these are kind of big, deep questions, and I would love to get both of your perspectives, and feel free to kind of go one after the other or to play off of what each other says. But I want you to think about the future, which obviously both of you do in your work on a regular basis. So thinking about the future in whatever context is relevant to you right now. So this could be like global climate change. This could be the future of citizen science, the future of your work, or even much larger kind of perspectives. The first thing I want to know is, what is the thing that absolutely keeps you up at night? The thing that you're most concerned about, that maybe you're even a bit pessimistic about, like things aren't looking very good, we got to get on this. And on the flip side of that, what is the thing that you are really genuinely hopeful and optimistic for? Feel free, if one of you has an answer that you just want to dive right in, you can. Otherwise, feel free to play off of each other with that.
Well, I would say that under the current administration in Washington, I really have been taken aback, although not unexpectedly, but I've been taken aback by, the follow through to destroy protections of clean water and clean air. And I worry about the generations that are going to follow us. I worry about the folks with asthma, and I worry about will there be enough clean water for drinking and agriculture, and I worry about will we be able to slow the earth from warming so that we can grow enough food to feed our own people.
Yeah, like what is actually going to happen as these even the minimal protections that have been in place are being systematically and kind of blatantly dismantled right in front of our eyes. That's such an important concern. Maria, is that similar to where you're standing, or do you have anything different or anything to add to that in terms of like what you're worried about?
I think this is similar, but I might state it in a different way, in that I'm most concerned with land use. Mm-hmm. And habitat destruction, and whether that be either eliminating things like forests or whatever, or polluting and not cleaning up, or not being required to clean up, or not being required to have a legitimate plan. So that's something that I'm concerned about. That does sort of mirror what Paul's saying. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that, yes, sustainability is also a factor there,
Absolutely. And sort of on the flip side of that, and it could be related or it could be completely different. What are you guys hopeful for? Where do you see that kind of light, that silver lining?
Well, I think that, the younger people that I've come across that visit the cemetery when we talk about these subjects are almost completely unified on these subjects. They're not going to their own corners and choosing what is truth based on their own desires at that time. They have accepted that there's a problem, and that the only solution is going to be through working together to solve it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm very much in agreement. I teach college students, and I have 2 students in elementary school, 2 kids in elementary school, and I am just like ready for the older generations to move on in regard to this. I'm so glad that education is really becoming very aware, specifically of environmental issues, and I hope that it's done correctly. But I'm really I'm optimistic. I have to be optimistic, right? I'm optimistic about it. I'm very glad to see that young generations have a different perspective than, say, mine did.
Yeah. Well, Paul and Maria, oh my gosh, I learned so much chatting with you today. I would love before we say goodbye for you to let us know, how can people learn more about the projects at Mount Auburn? If they want to get involved, how can they get involved? How can they follow you guys' individual work? Where should they go to look all this stuff up?
Well, you can go to our website, which is mountauburn.org. And we post information about our sustainability efforts on various social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we also promote our efforts locally. I'll visit the local libraries surrounding us to post materials, and many of our researchers, such as Maria, also reach out to folks on their own to kind of extend our sphere of influence about these subjects.
Very cool. Maria, anything to add to that?
Last year I started. I presented my data at a regional conference here in New England, and it was really great because it was something different. It was something very unique. And I got a lot of great feedback and conversations that came out of that. I'm hoping to present my data elsewhere, I'm willing to. I've told a lot of different groups I would be willing to. It's just a matter of them getting back to me, I guess. And I'd also like to, I'd like to publish more. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So people, hopefully even the broader community and the broader scientific community will have access to some of this information as well. Well, gosh, you guys, it's been so informative. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to enlighten us about the really incredible work that you're doing.
Thanks, Cara. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you, Cara.
Of course. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.